Hey everyone, welcome back to the second channel. Today we're going to be doing a deck profile on CyberGon, one of the most unique rogue decks from 2010. This is a deck I've been experimenting with a lot in the past year, and I've finally kind of come to a place where I want to explain the deck. I was going to do an article at an earlier point, but articles take quite a long time to write, and when I did that article, I wasn't really happy with the lists. Now I just want to clarify, I have not gotten tournament results with this deck. I've used CyberGon in 2 tournaments and basically just won nothing at both of them. I went 0-1 drop at the most recent tournament I went with it because I got phenomenally unlucky. Shout out to my opponent for raw judging with no Poke Powers into turn 3 Gardevoir Moonlight DC Psychic Lock for knockout. That was really cool with no power draw. And then the first tournament I got like turn 1 Machamp donked by Jay Hornung. So have not been able to get this deck off the ground, plus that first tournament I wasn't using the correct list. However, I've gotten a pretty high win percentage on the ladder. I'd say probably about 80% win rate on TCG1 ladder. Now obviously that doesn't mean anything because TCG1 players are not the most talented players on Earth, but I think the deck is a solid tier 2 deck in the 2010 format. With the caveat that you're not going to ever steal games with this deck. You're going to work for every win. And we'll get into that as I go. Let's start off the deck with 3 copies of Spiritomb. Spiritomb from Arceus, very, very good card. Has that Darkness Grace attack that evolves your Pokemon for free on the bench, while also damaging Spiritomb. And it has its Keystone Seal Pokebody, which is very important for stopping the opponent stopping either player rather from playing any trainer cards, which in this format means item cards. Our deck only has 6 item cards, so this trainer lock is going to hit the opponent a lot harder than it's going to hit us in most matchups. Some people play 4 Spiritomb in their decks. Recently they've cut out all of their starters and just went 4 Spiritomb. I've still been very happy with 3 Spiritomb. 3 Spiritomb accomplishes what you want to do, while also not getting too bulky, and having the extra slot lets you play an additional attack card that we'll talk about in a bit. But if you want to play 4 Spiritomb, I would not blame you. This is a heavy setup deck. Next up, we have 3 copies of our main line of the deck, being the Cyber part of CyberGon. We have Magnemite. This is the optimal Magnemite to play because of Magnet giving it free retreat, which allows you to potentially pivot into Spiritomb on the first turn. And you'll notice that we play 3 of them to increase this chance, as well as it just being a thicker line. Other than that, Magnemite doesn't have any notable attributes to talk about, other than that nice Psychic Resistance, which does come up. 2 copies of Magneton. Magneton does actually have a pretty useful second attack, which does 40 plus 10 for each energy attached to the defending Pokemon. There's a chance you might catch a Steelix Prime or something like that off guard if they attach a lot of energy. However, we don't run Memory Berry in this deck like most Flygon decks do. We'll talk about why later. So you're not going to be able to catch most Flygon or most decks off with that attack, just because you'll probably end up losing your Magneton in the process. Now, we have 3 different Magnezones in this deck. We'll talk about each of them individually. First is our one of Metal Magnezone. This Magnezone's really important, and honestly, probably the most important piece of just any Magnezone deck, which is why I've chosen to include it in all of my Magnezone lists. It has 120 HP, which is a little low. However, it has the Magnetized Pokebody, which says if it has metal energy attached to it, your opponent's or your active Pokemon that has metal energy attached to it gets free retreat. Now this is really big because we're pairing 2 different free retreating Pokemon, as you're going to see with Flygon is another Pokemon that gives your Pokemon free retreat together. But what Magnezone allows you to do is Flygon's going to take different types of energy to give your Pokemon free retreat, whereas Magnezone's going to be able to just give any of your Pokemon free retreat whenever you allow it, whenever you want it rather. And this allows you to change up your energy counts to be much more looking like a Magnezone deck than looking like a Flygon deck. Since Magnezone will give anything free retreat. It also lets you do one thing that Flygon does not do, which Flygon cannot give free retreat to colorless Pokemon. This isn't an issue for Flygon itself. Flygon has free retreat. However, there are other colorless Pokemon that exist in the 2010 metagame that we want to give free retreat that Flygon would love to play in other Flygon decks, but they cannot play because it does not get free retreat, meaning it gets trapped by something like SP. So that's very important. Magnezone also has Metal Blast, 50 plus 10 for each metal energy attached to Magnezone. This deck runs just enough metal energy to really make this attack do a lot of damage. And I'll talk about some specific math with that when we get to the metal energy counts in the deck, but just know that this deck is very viable, capable of doing exactly enough damage to take knockouts, but also is adjustable in damage so that you never have to take knockouts on something like a Feigning Spell Gengar if you do not want to, because you can move the energy around. Another thing to note, Magnezone has the Psychic Resistance, very good against Gardevoir Gallade. And lastly, the one thing I do want to note is that you do have a retreat cost of 4, which is huge. All the Magnezone in the decks have really huge retreat costs, so if your Pokebodies get shut down by Dialga, you're going to be forced to play a bit of a different game. So be careful for that. We have 2 copies of Magnezone from Stormfront. I originally only ran 1 copy of this Magnezone from Stormfront and 1 copy of Promo Magnezone, which has a 120 damage attack, and I'll talk why we changed that up. So Magnezone from Stormfront has the Super Connectivity Poke Power, which says that once during your turn you can accelerate a lightning or metal energy, including special, from your discard pile to your active Pokemon, and then they take 10 damage. Very, very good Poke Power, especially in this deck. We want to have our board filled with energy when we can, so that way we have different options to attack. Also helps you power up attackers out of nowhere that the opponent doesn't really expect. Then we have Gyro Ball, does 60, and you switch Magnezone with one of your, or you may switch Magnezone with one of your bench Pokemon. If you do, your opponent's also forced to switch. Now, on one hand, this is actually part of why the Magnezone is a good deck by itself in 2010, is that it functions as a hit-and-run deck. You hit and run into Spiritomb, and you item lock your opponent, or you hit and run into some other various wall, something like Mr. Mime that guards itself against Pokemon that don't have energy attached to them. Or don't have 3 energy attached to them for their attacks. Magnezone's great at doing that, but one thing you will want to notice is that this is a worse hit-and-run attack than on Gengar from Stormfront, or Gengar from Arceus, which does 60, 10 to the bench, and then switches. And the reason it's worse is because it forces your opponent to switch. Sometimes forcing your opponent to switch can be awkward, but in 2010 there's so many different free retreaters as well as Moonlight Stadium that usually forcing your opponent to switch is not going to be a significant downside for them, but is usually going to be a downside for you because they can hide their Pokemon on the bench. You know, it basically gives them a free pivot, and it also resets effects of attacks. So Garchomp C level X has an effect of its attack, Dragon Rush, that says you can't use Dragon Rush next turn, but if you switch to the bench, usually they'd have to play a Poke turn if they wanted to switch it to the bench and pick up, and bring the Garchomp back up in the same turn. You have done that switching for them. So this can be a significant downside. Be careful about using Gyro Ball carelessly. However, this is still a really good attack. We can hit and run to Spiritomb, very much good disruption, powerful attack. If you're doing 80 and hitting and running, or knocking out most low HP Pokemon in the format, very, very good. This attack costs Lightning colorless, so we have some Lightning energy in the deck. We do not play double colorless though. One thing you'll notice is the only other person I know who has this deck built is James G, who had it built at one point, and he chooses to play double colorless in both his regular Magnezone and his Flygon Magnezone decks. And you'd think it's almost a no-brainer considering the fact that these energy just pay for the double colorless effects in Flygon and Magnezone. But one thing I have noticed that this deck prefers to play the long game. I'm not as worried about getting out with like a turn 2 Gyro Ball because it's pretty unrealistic with only 6 item cards, only 5 of which being kind of fast item cards that get your deck moving, that you're going to be hitting any kind of fast Gyro Ball. It is a possibility, but it's very unlikely. Instead, my version's more focused on the long game. So we're going to not be playing any double colorless energy, we're just playing all single energy and trying to build a board. This is the deck called the Master of Wasting Time. It's going to take us a while to get where we want to be. Notable that Magnezone has Metal Resistance, nice little differentiator there, good for tanking hits against Steelix Prime if you have nothing else. Next up we have Magnezone LV.X. Magnezone LV.X 140 HP, has the Electric Trans Poke Power. It allows you to move your Metal and Lightning energy around your board however you like. This is really important. Again, we don't run double colorless energy. All of our energy, spare 1, are going to be able to be moved around the board. And thanks to Super Connectivity attaching from the discard pile, if we lose an energy in the early game, we can just attach that at some point and then move it somewhere else. That's a huge part of this deck. Magnezone LV.X, arguably the single most important card in this deck other than the Metal Magnezone, but super connectivity is also very important as well. One thing I will note about Magnezone LV.X is that it is a type change for the Stormfront Magnezone, so if you level up your Lightning Magnezone, you will no longer hit weakness on Gyarados, which sometimes can be relevant to keep in mind in certain matchups. However, you will gain access to the benefits of being a metal type, like a psychic resistance and access to special metal energy. So some things to keep in mind. Magnezone LV.X does have an increased fire weakness, so keep that in mind as well. And we have the Cyber Shock attack, which is lightning and metal. Does 80. You discard 2 energy, being lightning and metal, from Magnezone, and this paralyzes the opponent. Now this effect sounds extremely broken, just from the perspective of a modern player. We've seen effects like Wild Freeze and Wild Shock be playable in the late Sword and Shield block as instant paralysis attacks. You really don't see instant paralysis very often. However, it's not as good as you may initially think, except for this deck is better at using it the most. This is why the deck has gained the name CyberGon, is because I've played a lot of Magnezone and I've played a lot of this deck. In Magnezone, you might use Cyber Shock like once every few games. The paralysis is not that relevant in a format where Unown G can block effects of attacks, which means that it's really hard to paralyze people. Paralyze Pokemon. Don't paralyze people. That's life-ruining in some cases. And also there are problems with the fact that even if you do paralyze a Pokemon like a Pokemon SP, they can just use Poke-Turn to get out of it. Now this still can be valuable for resource pressure, but they can just Poke-Turn out of a paralysis, which will not take knockout, by the way. You're doing 80 damage with this attack, so you're not going to take a knockout on a level X Pokemon like Dialga or Garchomp. Even if with Expert Belt you're doing 100, still whiffing that key number for the knockout on the level X's, and then they can just use Poke-Turn, get out of it. Warp Energy, something like that to get out of the effect. Warp Point. Decks have these tools. If they see you're playing Magnezone, they're going to play around the fact that you can paralyze them. So it's not that relevant in most Magnezone decks. But in CyberGon, this is a deck that is the war of attrition. This is a deck where we are constantly just trying to pressure our opponent's resources. So rather than, you know, just constantly spam Gyro Ball like the regular Magnezone and just keep the opponent under item lock the whole game, this deck does have the ability to actually use Cyber Shock really effectively. Part of that's because we play 2 of the Stormfront Magnezone here, which lets us actually loop the attack, because Super Connectivity will get back 2 energy from the discard pile if you have 2 of these Magnezones in play, meaning that you can Cyber Shock loop. But also, this deck is really good at forcing your opponent to play down their Unown G in really uncomfortable spots to play around Cyber Shock, and then eventually you get to a point where they're forced to give you something that you can Cyber Shock, which gives this deck more utility with the attack than I'd say the regular Magnezone decks, which are usually much easier to play around this kind of effect. This deck has more options, is capable of doing more, if it is fully set up, of course, which can be a difficulty. Next up we have the Flygon line. That's, by the way, that's why we play 2 of these guys. One is for prizing. You play 2 of the Stormfront Magnezone. Prizing is a huge issue in this deck. There's also one-ofs. It really helped having a consistent line that I don't have to fetch from the prize cards. And 2 is being able to recharge Cyber Shock. Next up we have 2 copies of Trapinch. Trapinch is pretty goated, actually. In this deck, we do not play towards a Flygon trap win condition in most matchups. However, that is an option despite the fact we do not play Memory Berry for a permanent trap. Usually, Flygon decks will play Memory Berry to copy the Sand Tomb attack, which lets you stop the opponent from retreating. You bring something up into the active spot and then you stop it from retreating. Ergo, your opponent decks out. But in this deck, you can actually use Inviting Trap pretty well. This first attack on the Trapinch. Actually, both attacks can be used. We do have a Rainbow Energy to pay for the second attack, and I have used it before. But you find yourself using Inviting Trap a little bit more than you expect to break stalemates. You kind of force your opponent into a spot where if they play their Unown G down on a Pokemon, or if they're holding their Unown G in order to play around like Magnezone in the late game, you can do something like drag up their Claydol, and suddenly they're kind of forced to either Unown G their Claydol if they want to retreat again, or they're forced to like pay a double colorless energy. Things that can, or Warp Point, to retreat. There's things that you can do to pressure their resources with this Inviting Trap attack, and it's one of the skill benchmarks with this deck is finding out when you can get away with doing a little play like that. When would that play be better than using something like Spiritomb's Darkness Grace to set up another Pokemon, right? If you don't have a fully live Magnezone, is it better to mess with your opponent's board? Is it better to attack them if you do have a fully set up Magnezone, or is it better to Inviting Trap? This deck does not have to take all 6 prize cards. Just keep that in mind when you're playing the deck at all times. Next up we have Vibrava. Vibrava has a nice 70 HP, and the reason we play this one is because it has good attacks. I know some people have been playing the Fighting Vibrava lately, which does have 10 more HP, and it has the Fighting typing, meaning Flygon can give it free retreat. However, in this deck, we do not play Fighting Energy for Flygon, so Flygon cannot give it free retreat. Magnezone still can. And also the attacks are just really important on this guy. This is why most people throughout history have played this Vibrava, because the attacks are significantly better than the Fighting type Vibrava. Energy Typhoon says 20 times the number of energy in your opponent's discard pile, and then you shuffle those into your deck. This is an attack you don't want to use too much in this deck, just because we are trying to kind of resource war our opponent. However, I have won games with this attack multiple times because it just takes a knockout. Not as good as it is in 09, because in 2009 this takes knockouts on opposing Flygons, which is really good. But in 2010 this attack is still very good. There are chances where this attack will come up. Also, Quick Attack is a 20+20 on a coin flip. You can knock out Garchomp C with this attack if you get heads. Garchomp C level X with a belt. Every 2010 player who's played the format long enough has seen Quick Attack come up at some point. This Vibrava, I do believe, is the better one. 10 more HP would be nice in some circumstances, but you'll actually notice that the benchmark of 70 to 80 is significantly less relevant than like 60 to 70 or 80 to 90. If you're choosing between 80 to 90, you're usually going to pick the 90. If you're choosing between 60 to 70, you're going to pick the 70. When it comes to 70 and 80, there is not that much of a difference. For instance, if you're playing against a Luxchomp deck, if they're going to Garchomp you, they're going to Garchomp kill 70 or 80. If they're going to Luxray you, you have a lightning resistance, so you're still going to live the attack regardless of if they do one Crobat to hit 70, because it's still minus 20 down to 50, or if they're going to have to use 2 Crobats and still with the knockout because you have a lightning resistance. They both have the same lightning resistance. The number is not that relevant. Psychic Lock hits 60 without a belt, 80 with the belt. The numbers are still very much kind of wash when you get to arguing between 70 and 80. Not that many benchmark differences. 2 copies of Flygon here. We do not play the other Flygon that's in 2010, the Fighting type Flygon. Just not a very good card in the format. Fighting Flygon, useful for countering Luxchomp specifically, but not super useful outside of that. I do play it in my Metagon deck for that reason. In this deck, we're just playing 2 of the good Flygon. You'll notice we play a thinner line of the Flygon than we do the Magnezone. This is partially to take advantage of Magnemite's free retreat, but also Magnezone just plays a more important role in the opening of this deck. You do not really want to lead Flygon. Flygon's not that very proactive. It's not that good at being aggressive, and it takes a lot of work to get up. Magnezone's a little bit more resource-oriented, great at getting your early game going. So we only play 2-1-2. One of the problems I have found is prizing that Vibrava can make it a little tough to get this guy set up. But one of the beneficial things about this deck is you don't really need that Flygon set up in the early game. As long as you can just candy it into play at some point, you're fine. So I haven't found it to be too much of an issue, though I have lost games on occasion to prizing the Vibrava when I like opened a Trapinch or something like that and not being able to get set up. under double Spiritomb active lock. That can be an issue, just keep that in mind. Flygon has Rainbow Float. If you have an energy attached to Flygon that's a basic energy and it matches the same type as your other Pokemon in play, you give them free retreat. So Magnezone gives free retreat to just any Pokemon in the active that has a metal energy. Flygon says, okay, if I attach a metal energy to my Flygon, a basic metal energy to my Flygon, all of my metal Pokemon get free retreat. If I attach a basic lightning energy to Flygon, all my lightning Pokemon get free retreat. Usually Flygon is the main, most powerful retreating effect in a deck, and usually that would be the case. Flygon is very powerful. This deck, though, does not play many different kinds of basic energy. In fact, there's only two, being lightning and metal. So Flygon can't give free retreat to things like Spiritomb, Trapinch, Claydol, etc. You're kind of reliant on the Magnezone line for that. However, that's not as much of an issue as you may think. Flygon is here for different kinds of pressure. Again, we're this control-style resource war deck. Part of that is Sandwall. Sandwall is very, very good. It says, discard a stadium card in play, and if you do, prevent all effects of attacks, including damage done to Flygon during your opponent's next turn. This plays really well with our level X card, which I'm just going to put underneath for now, so that you guys can see this. Because the level X has the Pokebody Wind Erosion, which mills your opponent between turns if it's in the active spot. This is a huge part of Sandwall being a good attack. And it lets you control your opponent's board. Getting rid of important things like Moonlight Stadium is really, really important for stopping your opponent from being able to freely pivot around the board while you are able to freely pivot. You want to up your mobility, lower your opponent's mobility. Also very good against Gyarados. Putting a Flygon level X in the active spot and using Sandwall will discard their Stadium, their Broken Time Space, and then they're much more vulnerable. Do be careful though, if you're putting up a Flygon, it means they get item cards, they can potentially gust around your Flygon. But that mill is very important. We also have Power Swing, very good generic attack, does 60 plus 10 for each evolved Pokemon on your bench. If you're not playing against a Dusknoir deck, you can very reasonably hit 110 damage in the late game with this attack. It's a pretty good benchmark damage amount, so it's worth keeping in mind. Useful lightning resistance as well, which actually does come up a significant amount in this deck. And then the level X has its attack, Extreme Attack, which is very good. Does 150 snipe to any level X on your opponent's board with no downside. Insanely good attack. And it also helps shore up Magnezone's really bad matchup into GG AMU. GG AMU, for anyone who does not know, is a Azelf, Mesprit, Uxie Gardevoir deck. And usually Magnezone's really good into Gardevoir because you can either item lock them the whole game and eventually they run out of Pokemon, or you can just build up a big metal Magnezone and they can't knock it out. Usually that's a more reliable plan because Gardevoir is starting to play a lot more Nidorina now, so they can outlast an item lock, but they will. They still can't KO your Magnezone if you have like 4 special metal energy. You're taking minus 60 from psychic attacks. They're going to have a hard time dealing with that. So one of the things that this deck can do is use that Flygon Extreme Attack to kill Pixie level X's, things like Azelf, Mesprit, Uxie level X, to prevent Gardevoir AMU players from using their God Blast, Supreme Blast on Mesprit level X to kill Magnezone. Because usually Magnezone just has a pretty bad matchup into GG AMU because they can just, at some point in the game, they're going to hit you for like 160 damage, even through resistance, special metals, all that bullshit. You still die to Mesprit level X's attack. Which makes it really hard for regular Magnezone, but Flygon helps that. Also useful for taking out SP level X's. Being able to attack something on the bench is very, very broken. Magnezone cannot attack things on the bench. This deck is able to check SP level X, is able to kill Floatzel, GL level X, and Gyarados. Able to hunt down Torterra level X's on the bench in the Flygon Mirror, which is also very important. Though do be careful for your opponent's own Flygons coming to knock you out. There's a lot this card can do, which is why it is such an important part of the deck. The milling is also a really important part of the deck because you can mill people out pretty frequently with this Flygon deck, but you're not going to do it in the same way that Flyterra or Metagon would, where you're trying to trap the opponent and just deck them out slowly. You can do that. It's not the most reliable plan with this deck. A lot of times what this deck will do is you will use Gyro Ball against a Pokemon like Gyarados, or against something that cannot one-hit KO a Flygon level X, and you will hit and run into Flygon level X, and you'll take one card off going into their turn, and if they don't force you to switch, you'll take another card off going into your turn. This is just more resource pressure on the opponent. Again, this idea of we want to lower our opponent's options throughout a game while building up our own options. We're essentially playing like a control deck. You're going to lower your opponent's options, you're going to get more of your own. And Flygon's a huge part of that. Being able to just mill a couple cards throughout a game is really, really important, especially if you're milling against aggro decks, you're milling plus powers, or you're milling Pokeblowers, or you're milling Night Maintenance is the biggest one. If you can hit those cards, very, very good. It's very, very good to hit those. Even just hitting blank cards, though, it's very easy for Flygon to eventually, over the course of like a 40-turn game, Flygon will get to a point where it's decking the opponent out from taking cards. Next up, we have the other most important line in the deck. We have the 1/1/1 Nidoqueen line. You should always play this Nidoran because Offer Help is a great attack. This is the best Nidoran by far. And you should always play this Nidorina because Rescue is a great attack. If you play enough slower decks, you will see these attacks come up. So despite the fact that the other Nidorina has like a hit attack, you'd rather play this one. And we have Nidoqueen, which is there for its Maternal Comfort Poke Body that heals your board for 10 in between turns. Now you can't stack, so you can't put multiple Nidoqueen in play, otherwise we would. But it is a very, very powerful Pokebody, arguably the single most powerful Pokebody in 2010, other than Dialga level X, just because Dialga shuts down the other Pokebodies. But this deck is, again, great at buying time. Using things like Sand Wall or Cyber Shock, we can steal turns from our opponent, and then heal up. Using things like our Magnezone here, which can do, let's just say, we can put up a Metal Magnezone with 4 special Metal Energy. It takes like 100 damage from a Steelix attack, and then we retreat it into a Magnezone level X and move the special energy over. Now we have another attacker, which we retreat into Lightning Magnezone, which resists Steelix so it can live an attack. And eventually what you're doing is you're just building up healing as you switch between your attackers. Now, Gardevoir can do stuff like this. However, Gardevoir does not have 140 HP and does not have special Metal Energy. Flyterra can do this, but Flyterra does not have the same amount of mobility with Magnezone that we do. So this deck is just, again, all of the options. Like I said, you're not going to steal games with this deck because it doesn't set up quickly. You're not going to like win games against opponents by sacking them. But you can build these very invincible boards even when you fall behind 4 or 5 prize cards against a stage 2 deck. You can build a board against something like I played against Garchomp SV on the Speed Chomp, some people call it, on TCG1, and I was able to build a board even though I went behind 4 prize cards in the early game. By the end of the game, he could not attack, and he decked out. Nidoqueen's also got a good attack. Ruthless Tail does 50 plus 10 for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. If you can find a chance to attack with Nidoqueen, it's a good user of Expert Belt, allowing it to live attacks. It's also got a useful lightning resistance. You can use Nidoqueen to attack the opponent. Particularly, I remember in that game against Speed Chomp, I used Nidoqueen to knock out an opponent's Nidoqueen. Because Ruthless Tail plus Weakness, you're doing 80 base, plus however many bench Pokemon they have, plus Expert Belt. You can knock out an opponent's Nidoqueen while keeping your own safe. But be careful attacking with Nidoqueen. You do not want Nidoqueen to go down. Next up, we have our other tech line in the deck. 1/1 Exploud. The Whismur is not really important. It just has 60 HP and the other one has 50. So we play the one that has more HP to avoid things like Uxie Donks against Gyarados. And then you have the Exploud, which is actually a very, very good card that Flygon decks usually can't play. Exploud has 130 HP. It has the Pokebody Erasing Sound. Each of your Pokemon has no weakness. Not our opponents, our Pokemon. This lets you play a much more even game against SP, which would otherwise just kind of run that really slow deck that's weak to Fire, Fighting, Fire, Fighting, Psychic, and Colorless. Colorless especially, with Garchomp C level X. A lot of your guys have very exploitable weaknesses against SP. They will run you off the board. But with Exploud, he is just a very, very good guy for maintaining your, guys on your board, not letting them get knocked out by weakness. If they don't get knocked out, now you can hide them on the bench, force it to be more difficult for the opponent. Also lets you attack in the Flygon mirror much more confidently with your Flygons. Your opponent will need a ton, including like an expert belt if they want to take a knockout on your Flygon, well, your Flygon can just attack freely in the mirror, making that a much more reasonable matchup. But Exploud also has some decent attacks. The first attack, Knockback, does 40, and your opponent switches the defending Pokemon. I've had instances where the opponent throws up a Garchomp C-Level X extra to sack, and you can take a knockback knockout, doing 80 with weakness. And then there's also Hyper Beam, which does 60, and flip a coin of heads, discard an energy attached to the defending Pokemon. This deck is actually really, really good in this deck, because it plays into this deck's kind of core idea of we want to remove the opponent's resources. So there's plenty of times in matchups where I've snuck an Exploud in to like steal an energy off our opponent by doing something like, you know, Hyper Beaming, and even if you get Tails, it's like not that big of a deal. There's some matchups where Exploud is not that good. Even in those matchups, the Hyper Beam attack is still somewhat useful. If you can flip heads, you know, you're removing the opponent's resources, forcing them again into that more of that resource grind. I played a game against Jumpluff with this deck not that long ago, and Hyper Beam was able to come up there to remove an energy, and Exploud lived one attack from Mass Attack, which was nice because I just started my Whismur, but I still got value out of that Whismur before it went down. Exploud's main thing, though, is that weakness removal. Fantastic in this deck. I've been a huge fan of Exploud, and usually Flygon can't play Exploud because I can't give Exploud free retreat with Rainbow Flow, but Magnezone can, which makes it really good. Next up we have 2 copies of Baltoy. We play Fighting Baltoy for that chance to draw with Psychic Balance. A lot of people have been switching off to Psychic Baltoy to take advantage of the amount of Moonlight Stadiums there are. I just think that your opponent's not going to give you Moonlight Stadium unless they have to. It's a deck like Gengar, a good Gengar player is not going to play Moonlight Stadium until they're attacking you. That kind of interaction is going to be much more rare. If you're playing your own Moonlight Stadium, go ahead and play the Psychic one, right? But if you're playing against an opponent playing Moonlight Stadium and you're reliant on them throwing that down to give you access to that, they're not going to do that until they have to. So play the Fighting one, get that Psychic Balance draw. I know it's expensive, it is what it is. 2 copies of Claydol, there for that Cosmic Power, lets us draw through our deck. We can also use Spinning Attack. I have not used Spinning Attack since building this deck. I've used Spinning Attack before. I've used it with Hippowdon, Level X, decks with like the Stark Mountain Stadium card that play multiple fighting energy can use Spinning Attack. We do not run more than 1 energy to pay for the attack, and we don't want to let that energy get discarded. It can't be recycled, so don't worry about Spinning Attack. Just for Cosmic Power, the best consistency ever seen. 1 copy of Bronzong E4. We play this instead of the 4th Spiritomb here. This is a tech seen by David Sturm in his list from 2010 Worlds Flyterra. Hand Refresh forces each player to shuffle away their hand and draw 4 cards. Bronzong also has a lot of HP. Having 90 HP is huge for a basic, even bigger than most of the SP Pokemon that you're seeing in 2010. And also got a Payback attack. I haven't used this attack for full effect ever, but this deck, if there would be any deck where you'd use Payback, this would be it. It does 10 plus 50 if your opponent has 1 prize card left, and then you confuse them. So I guess Last Ditch, you could move over your Rainbow Energy and try to confuse them to cheese them. I personally would not rely on using this attack, but it's there, I guess. Hand Refresh is the reason we're playing this card. Unfortunate Psychic Weakness is pretty bad, but Fire Resistance, I don't know, sometimes might come up or something like that. I think I've had it come up 1 time with Bronzong GE's Fire Resistance against an opposing SP deck. I used it to tank a hit from a Blaziken. But otherwise, in this deck, you could either run 4th Spiritomb, or you could run Bronzong, or you could run Chatot if you want to run Chatot. I don't think Chatot's that good, though, in this deck. The reason we run Bronzong is because we don't run any other hand disruption cards in this deck. We're not playing Judge, we're not playing Looker, so it's a way to hand disrupt the opponent. It also doubles for its high HP of being a great starter against Gyarados for preventing a donk. Gyarados is going to have a pretty hard time hitting 90 in the opening turn, so that's useful versus Spiritomb. Usually they can hit 60. However, it's also good against Sableye, and this is one of the things that this deck can do better than other Flygon decks because it has Exploud and it has Bronzong, is if you get on the board against Sableye, it's going to be hard for them to tear apart your board. Now, you are very, very high maintenance, but against especially bad Sableye players, there's a lot of people who play Sableye who don't know how to play the deck. You can take advantage of their Sableye start by having a Pokemon that's very difficult for Sableye to knock out, and then hand refreshing their hand back in. Against good Sableye players, you're going to struggle to take advantage of this as much, but against bad players, which there have been a lot of people playing TCG1 who don't know how to play Sableye well, you can win games just with hand refresh by itself. Just limiting your opponent. They're going to burn their supporter cards to try to get their board set up, and you're going to just take away their hand each turn, while also preventing them from donking you. 1 copy of Uxie, set up, draw some cards. Psychic Restore allows you to get Uxie off the board. This is very useful in this deck. We want to clear our free prizes off the board. 1 copy of Azelf is very, very good for that Time Walk. Lets you check your prize cards and find a Pokemon, and then you get to map out the remaining prize cards, or all of your remaining prize cards for the rest of the game, which is very, very important in this deck. You notice we have 1 of Magnezone LV.X, 1 of Flygon LV.X, 1/1/1 Nidoqueen, 1/1 Exploud, 1 Magnezone Metal. Lots of 1-ofs. This deck needs Azelf for sure. Do not let the Gaslighters tell you Azelf is a bad card. 1 copy of Unown G. Guard is very, very good. Lets you prevent effects of attacks. Against Curse Guard, it's very good for preventing Shadow Room. Also very good against other Magnezone decks, or against SP decks that would try to trap you, against Flygon Mirrors to prevent yourself from getting trapped. Unown G has a lot of utility. I'd be here all day explaining the different utilities. Against Shenlock, you prevent a Luring Flame trap on your Claydol. There's all kinds of different stuff that Unown G helps with. I would not cut it from this list. Yeah. Curse Guard is unfortunately not a great matchup still with this deck. That's one thing I will say. Even with Unown G, Curse Guard is kind of a bot deck with the way people are playing it. Just using heavy Shadow Room and Poltergeist spam. Very, very hard to beat that sometimes if they just overwhelm you. But you can beat bad Curse Guard players, of which there are many, because many people are trying out the deck. It has won lots of tournaments. You can beat the bad players with this, but you're going to struggle against a good Curse Guard player. 4 copies of Roseanne finds 2 in a combination of basic Pokemon and basic energy. Very important throughout a game for finding the energy. Very important in the early game for finding Spiritomb and your Magnemite, stuff like that. Being able to find that Baltoy. 4 copies of Bebe. I just recommend playing 4 of these in every evolution deck if you can. Or almost every evolution deck, Gyarados notwithstanding. If you play basic energy, you should be playing Roseanne over Collector, in my opinion. Almost always, besides SP. And Bebe is just insanely good, especially when we're playing 4 copies of Spiritomb. You only have 1 Pokecom in this deck because we have 4 Bebe. Spiritomb's going to be turning off those Pokecoms, turning off those luxury balls, stuff like that. So it's important to keep in mind when you're playing this deck about how live certain cards are. And Bebe is always live, so it's very, very good. 3 copies of Professor Oak. Shovel Draw 6. This is something I stole from James G's list. James G has his Flyterra list, which plays 3 copies of Oak as well. And 3 copies of Oak just really, really helps the deck get going, despite the fact that, Power Lock is tough sometimes, and you get judged into a bad hand with Psychic Lock, or you get, you just kind of open a bad hand, or even in the late game, your Claydol gets killed. What do? Oak is a great draw card. You could play Judge in this spot. James G actually played Judge in his CyberGon list as a way to Judge Trainer Lock the opponent. Understandable. But personally, I've just found Professor Oak to be better in all these Flygon decks because they have such heavy setup needs. Next up we have 4 copies of Rare Candy. Choose a basic Pokemon in play, evolve it into Stage 1 or Stage 2 from your hand. Sometimes, I know I've been advocating a lot lately, if you've been paying attention to my content, for Rare Candy into Stage 1. It's something I find myself doing way more in 2010 lately, is just taking the opportunity to Rare Candy out something like a Haunter for the free retreat cost, or Rare Candying into a Machoke and then Darkness Gracing it into Machamp. Stuff like that gives Rare Candy a lot more value, being able to use it for that instant Stage 1. However, in this deck, things can get really, really tight in this deck, so I would not recommend using your Rare Candies too frivolously, because we have so many Stage 2 lines, we have such a long-term game plan. That in this deck, you're typically playing with all 4 rare candies getting 4 stage 2s out. If you're going to have a game where you're giving up 6 prize cards, taking 6 prize cards, that is. 1 copy of Night Maintenance recovers 3 cards from the discard pile, and 1 copy of Pokécom. Pokécom is just a general search card. We just have 1 here to help us out with search. However, this card could be potentially exchanged for something else, which I'll talk about in a minute. Night Maintenance is a really nice card just for getting back your cards from the discard pile. You could theoretically play 2. I know Tfue played a Flygon list that won a retro tournament, and his Flygon list plays like a ridiculous amount of recovery, almost exclusively built to beat Kurskar in the mirror and just get 100 zeroed by SP decks. Our list is a little bit more on the general matchup playing field. You want 1 Night Maintenance most games. It would be nice to have 2. It's not worth cutting the slot for. 1 Communication is just nice general search. You'll find that 4 BBs is really good, but you want to be able to BB and Com or Roseanne and Com, usually 1 turn throughout a game to find a stage 2 line. One of the things you could potentially add here instead of Com is Premier Ball or Luxury Ball. I did used to have Luxury Ball in this deck, but this deck is a little too reliant on the level X's and plays a shit ton of Pokemon, so I've chosen to play Com over Luxury Ball. Premier Ball, on the other hand, though, is something I've considered in the deck just because Premier Ball is really good at getting back level X's, and Night Maintenance is usually able to get back 1 line from the discard pile, right? You can get a Magnezone level X, and a Magnemite, or you can get back a Flygon level X, a Flygon, and a Trapinch. One thing I've realized is that this deck sometimes falls short on the recovery aspect, and you don't always need, multiple lines back. Again, at that point, you've usually lost the game, or you've won the game. But it would be nice to have 1 Premier Ball, just to have that instant access to reuse a level X card without being forced to use our Night Maintenance for it. One thing that's nice about this deck, though, is you don't need to ever recover energy from the discard pile because Magnezone's Super Connectivity does that for you. Other than that, you'll notice we don't play any Memory Berry. Memory Berry, very common in Flygon decks. For that deck out potential, use Trapinch's Sand Tomb attack, and then Flygon's Poke Body mills them till they deck out. I used to play it in this deck, but realistically, you are going to get some chances where that would be valuable from Trapinch's Inviting Trap and Magnezone's Hit and Run capabilities, forcing awkward targets in the active spot, but I wasn't finding it come up very often. So I chose to cut it. It's a very good card, but if you're not playing it on a game-to-game basis, don't use it. 2 copies of Expert Belt. Expert Belt is a tool card that boosts your damage by 20 and boosts your HP by 20, but you give up an extra prize card. This is a card that you almost want to play 3 of in the deck just to have 3 of them in play at all times. But 2 gets by pretty fine. You're able to find them when you want. 2 is enough. Again, this deck is not built for the kind of 2010 player that's just getting started with the format. This is a deck with like 80 moving pieces with 60 cards, and you're just going to have to use your Expert Belts well, and 2 will be enough in this deck. The biggest thing that Expert Belt benefits from more than even the damage buff is the HP buff. Again, this is kind of like a control deck where we're trying to let our opponent hit one of our guys. Like, we can promote like a Flygon level X with a belt, have our opponent hit it for like 140 damage with an attack, and then Flygon lives the attack and we just switch it out and bring up the Flygon later. Things like that are reasons why I'd want more Expert Belts. You can bring up more situational attackers like Nidoqueen and Exploud, have them guaranteed to live a hit, because when they don't use Special Metal Energy, some of these guys, only having 120 HP can get knocked out. But our goal is just to make that as difficult as possible. Just play your Expert Belts very carefully. Do not just drop the belt on the opening turn. Play consciously when you're playing this deck, and you'll be fine. That's basically all of the resources with this deck. Are just, it felt really bad at first until I figured out the exact count of everything, and then it's just I need to play to my best every single game to make this deck work. 4 copies of Metal Energy. Special Metal Energy gives you that -10 damage if it's attached to a metal Pokemon. Really important for Magnezone, and because we can move that around our board, you can load different Magnezones up at a time. So let's just say your opponent Dragon Rushes one of your let's just say you have a Magnezone level X in play that's leveled up from a Lightning guy, and you have this Magnezone, your opponent attacks or Dragon Rushes this guy, you can hide him on the bench, make it as hard to KO as possible by stacking the metal energies, or you can just say, okay, he's going to die, I'm going to move the energy to something else. Another thing that's really useful with this deck is that you can get these metal energies back with super connectivity. This is part of knowing how to play the deck, is finding a free retreat pivot, which is everything in this deck, and promoting something to the active. Let's just say if you have your Claydol in play, you can promote Claydol, and you can super connectivity to attach the energy to the Claydol so that Claydol takes damage instead of your actual Pokemon before you retreat, and then you can move the energy around. So there's a lot of things in this deck about learning how to manage your damage, prevent the opponent from ever making any progress. That's pretty important. And Nidoqueen, also the healing, helps with special energy a lot. You can take a hit with something like Magnezone level X and then Cyber Shock the opponent, making them unable to attack. If they use Warp Point, which most decks do play, then your Magnezone's hiding safely on the bench. 3 copies of Lightning Energy. Very, very good to have some searchable lightning energy for both Cyber Shock and Gyro Ball. I decided 3 was the right count. I originally played 4, I believe, in this deck, but I decided to cut back on the energy a lot. You'll notice it's actually one of the lowest energy counts, I think, in any of my 2010 decks, especially these Evo decks. This is a guy, all of my guys take 3 energy to attack, pretty much. But this deck is actually playing a very, very low amount of energy for a deck like this. SP decks, can get away with like 10 to 12 energy. Gyarados gets away with 0 if it wants to. But I'm just playing these 3 lightning here. It's been enough to find it throughout a game. You can recover it. This deck isn't worried about using Gadget Bolt Magnezones, so you don't always have to discard them. Cyber Shock, of course, does discard them. Just be careful with how you manage your energy. Discard your basic metal and your basic lightning, so you don't have to recover your basic lightning to play the game, right? Or so you don't have to recover your special metal if you discarded that to take advantage of its damage reduction. Stuff like that. Little things you learn while playing the deck. 1 basic metal. This is for a specific damage math range, but also it's just really nice to have a searchable copy of metal energy so you can start using Magnetize immediately. Some games you just don't draw into your special metals consistently in the opening, and it's just going to take you a while to get there. You will win the game eventually if you can draw them, but sometimes it might take a few turns, like 12 turns, to find your special metal energies, and it's just how long can I last. Having 1 metal energy that can be found from the deck just to let you start using Magnetize is really important. Letting Flygon free retreat your guys is also very important. Remember, Flygon can use basic energy, not special energy, so if you can't find your Metal Magnezone, if it's prize, you can still use this Metal Energy to free retreat your Metal Magnezones with Flygon. We also play Rainbow Energy. Rainbow Energy does 10 damage when you attach it to your Pokemon, but it counts in any energy. This is a big thing that I've loved in Magnezone decks in general. It allows you to attack with Nidoqueen, and sometimes you lock up Azelf. But also, it's just a nice flexibility piece. For one, you now have 6 metal energy, so your Metal Blast will hit 110 or hit 130 if you have an Expert Belt, meaning you'll KO Gardevoir and Gardevoir level X, or Gardevoir with Belt. You will with KO on maxed out Gardevoir level X, but you can extreme attack that. And then also just, it's a nice flexibility piece. You have access to more attacks. Again, we want more options, because the more options you have, with this deck, if you just pick the best options each turn, you're going to put yourself in a better spot. And that can be very difficult. This deck is very, very difficult to play, but I promise it's very rewarding if you know your lines, you know your attacks, you know to expect and to gamble sometimes, like, oh, is my opponent playing Dusknoir? Well, I just have to play around the fact that they're not playing Dusknoir this turn until I can control my board better. And sometimes you're going to lose that gamble, and that's on you as a player, and sometimes you're going to win that gamble, and it's going to feel great. Finally, 1 copy of Warp Energy. Seems a bit confusing to put Warp Energy in a deck where we have 2 free retreating Pokemon. However, this is important for infinite traps, such as in the Flygon Mirror. It's also important for escaping Poison Bind Roserade traps, things that would knock you out going back into your turn, things like Gliscor, Paralysis traps can be, something you gotta play around. So this deck runs, just a decent variety of ways to escape different kinds of outs. Warp Energy is very good also When Dialga GE level X comes into play, it's going to turn off all of your free retreat, besides Flygon's natural free retreat. So it's going to be really important if you want to be able to move your Magnezone to be able to do that. There's also turns where I've done double level ups, where I've had a Flygon level X in my hand. I have my Magnezone active. I could retreat into Flygon, but I don't want to endanger it. So I warp energy into Flygon, level it up, and then pivot Flygon back into Magnezone or another attacker. So all kinds of different uses for warp energy. It's an incredible amount of variety in one slot. Now again, this deck's energy count is very low. We only have 10 energy. This is remarkably low for a high energy cost deck. But with the 2 super connectivities, you actually get away with this way more than you should. So I think 10 energy has, in fact, played fine. As long as you can find them consistently enough with Roseanne in the opening, it's not too bad. Anyway, that's been CyberGon. I believe I've covered everything that I wanted to cover today. Things that I want to talk about. This deck. This deck is uniquely, among Flygon decks, probably the most difficult to play. Either this or Flygon Dusknoir, I'd say, would be the most difficult Flygon decks in 2010. Flyterra gets these boards where it just, sometimes it sets up really well, and it just kind of auto-wins matchups with Giga Drain Torterra. This deck doesn't really have that same auto-win kind of opening, but by the same portion, Flygon Torterra also can set up as consistently as it wants against a deck like SP and still lose the game, because a good player can manage to take your board apart, and Flygon Torterra is not very good at being proactive. This deck is, among Flygon decks, very able to be proactive. You can play the game at any speed you want, and you never have to worry about taking all 6 prize cards against non-SP decks, because you can reach a board state where you deck out decks like Gyarados and Jumpluff and the like. But anyway, that's all I had to talk about with CyberGon. Hopefully you enjoyed this deck profile, and give the deck a try if you haven't already.